Oh shit. The last episode of this Kawasaki revival project ended right about here. Prior to this point, I removed, tore down, completely cleaned, and reassembled the carburetors and got this bike to fire up for the first time in nearly 2 decades. The bike runs, but not for more than a couple minutes. Or at least I won't let it run any longer than that. There's a fuel leak, coolant leak, and also an air leak into the exhaust. I'll explain more about the latter later, but in the meantime, I want to take care of that fuel leak. I actually yanked the carbs off the bike minutes after getting it going, just because I knew it would be too tempting to keep running the bike with them installed. But after ordering some brand new O-rings and getting back to work, we are where we left off. The source of the fuel leak was just one little fitting. However, I wanted to replace all of the O-rings on all of the fittings. And that's easy enough. The carbs don't have to be completely torn down like last time, just separated from each other. So after simply unbolting the two brackets and the choke slide rail, the fuel tubes can be pulled out and the O-ring swapped over. The only thing that might make this a frustrating job would be if I completely forgot to line up one of the butterfly valves and didn't realize until the very end. Oh, you gotta be shitting me. Can't slide this thing out without undoing literally everything. Okay, with that taken care of, the last thing to do is... God dang it, I forgot to put the springs on! Oh my... I really wish this was me doing this for laughs, but no, I'm just dumb. You've got to be shitting me. You've got to be With the O-ring swap finally wrapped up, these carbs can go back on the bike, and I can get some fuel flowing to see if it actually made a difference. After hooking the gasoline IV drip back up and opening the valve, there doesn't appear to be any leaks. Cool. Let's start her up. Not as quick to turn on this time. Well, that sounds fantastic. And there's no leaks. There's no leaks whatsoever. And there's no smoking this time, so that's also cool. Let's see if it will start easily now that I got it going. Beautiful! Beautiful! Something you may have noticed is the very audible change in the exhaust sound that occurs when I plug these two hoses on top of the engine. Now you might be asking, why in the world does plugging crankcase breather hoses affect how the exhaust sounds? Well, Tanner, they're not crankcase breather hoses. They are, in actuality, part of the clean air system that Kawasaki introduced only on the North American version of these bikes. The system was put in place to meet strict emission requirements, but having it installed now isn't necessarily necessary. The way the system functions is based entirely on the bike's use of a waste spark ignition system, the utilization of 2 ignition coils for the 4 cylinders. Inside the engine, there's a spark happening in both cylinders that reach the top at the same time, but the combustion cycles are 180 degrees out of phase. One spark happens at the end of the compression stroke, and the other spark happens at the end of the exhaust stroke. The clean air system basically allows outside air to get sucked in through the cylinder head and into the exhaust passage. And with that extra spark happening during the exhaust stroke combined with the now extra oxygen introduced, any fuel that didn't burn off during the power stroke is now burnt off in the exhaust pipe, producing harmful emissions. And this system is actually only activated at higher RPMs, not at idle or anything, because there's a little vacuum actuated valve that meters when the air is sucked in. And that valve is exactly what's missing on my bike, along with the factory airbox that it tied into. So the simplest solution is just to cap off the intakes, ignoring the system altogether. I did leave the reed valves inside the engine kind of just sitting there, but functionally speaking, it's the exact same as all the bikes produced for the rest of the world now. Adding to the list of things this bike still is leaking coolant. I knew it was puking coolant out of the thermostat housing, which was apparent in the last episode, but now I can clearly see it's coming from between the housing itself and the little adapter plate for the cap. The thermostat is what diverts coolant from the engine to the radiator to actually cool it down, so I'd kinda rather not dump it to the outside world.
Oh yeah, that's smoking.
But on a positive note, the temperature gauge started rising on the instrument cluster, so I guess that means both the sensor and the gauge itself are functioning, so that's cool. What's not cool though are ghosts taking home inside your motorcycle and turning on the radiator fan at random.
Oh shit. Why is it that when I touch the throttle cables, the fan turns on? Okay, there's gotta be a short somewhere or something. Holy crap.
I did a bit of digging around and stumbled across the coolant sensor right here. I thought grounding this might trigger the fan, but no, it just pegged the coolant gauge. I guess that verifies the gauge is functioning though.
Oh! Ha!
It turns out that the short was being caused by this little wire right here. And the reason this loose wire exists at all is because of the coolant temperature switch. This is what triggers the fan to come on. I didn't recognize it at first because the wire that's supposed to be there has been totally ripped out.
This blue wire goes into the harness right here. And this green wire just bolts directly to ground right there. That's probably what that switch was for on the little bezel.
It's absolutely what it was for. If the wires being the perfect length wasn't enough proof, the missing terminals are still very attached to the switch. I was wondering way back in part 1 when tearing these panels off why this was here. Now I know. It's just a quick and dirty fix to keep the bike cool. Funnily enough, I actually found the same fix done on another GPZ1000 when scouring eBay for parts. Now I could keep this fix on my bike, but I still went ahead and bought a replacement temperature switch. So while I wait for that to arrive, how about I do something about the leaky thermostat housing? Kawasaki, in a cruel act, decided to not use any easy to remove hex bolts here. Even with the impact driver, I still struggled a lot, to the point where struggling with the impact driver was no longer an option.
Nope, that's just mangled. But
the next course of action, which is one I'm not too happy with, is welding a nut to the top, because the adapter plate for the cap is plastic, and I didn't want to weld too close to that and mess it up. But after welding, I sprayed it down with water ASAP just to cool everything off as quickly as possible. But did it work?
No, it just broke right off. Shit. Alright, next best thing.
Cutting a slot into the bolt allows me to get a flathead on here, so that hopefully I'm still actually able to turn it with something. But I'll spare you the suspense this time. Didn't work.
This is why you don't design a vehicle with Phillips head bolts.
Well, it's actually JIS, but the point still stands. The bolts holding the two halves of the housing together, however, are hex and should turn a lot easier, right?
Okay, when I turn the head, the other end's not turning. Same for this.
I guess forget what I said about these probably being easier to remove.
Yeah. What about this one? Way over here, just a support bolt. That one broke too.
Well, there's still one more bolt. Oh, wow, this one's actually coming off.
I'm glad it was the last one, because if it was the first one, it would have given me false hope for the rest of them. I probably would have been more mad than I am now.
I was trying to remain optimistic, hoping that I could extract the 5 out of 6 bolts that sheared off inside the casting, but guess what? Nothing worked.
Well, I'm having no luck with this. And I just realized also that I totally broke this part of the housing. I'm having no luck getting these out. If it's like 20 bucks on eBay, I'm probably just gonna buy a used one. Well, apparently a replacement of this is only $14 on eBay with shipping, so. However, it's still not here yet, so I'm gonna work on some other stuff.
Maybe I'll work on shamelessly plugging this brand new Fingerprints Workshop merch I'm wearing. This shirt commemorates this 1986 GPZ project. Now you may be asking, why does it say FPW when clearly the initialism should be FW based on the capitalization you use in your video's intro? If you want to get one, there will be a link in the description. But in the meantime, I guess I can also work on replacing the very broken radiator fan. To do that, I need to pull the radiator, and to do that, I need to drain the coolant. Now, there is a drain bolt, but I'm too scared that I'll shear that off too, so just yanking the hoses off is the next best option.
Let's see if this little container is going to be enough. Ooh, that is not enough. And also that is just straight up concentrate.
Yeah, this does look very green. But next I remove both the driver's side horn and the driver's side horn. After undoing the bolts and unplugging the fan, the whole thing can be removed. This has definitely seen better days, but not to worry. I actually bought a replacement fan for this well over a year ago, but before I swap it in, I might as well do a flush first. Honestly, everything came out crystal clear, so I guess it should be good to go. I noticed that the inlet pipe was a little distorted, so I did my best to rectify that.
It's no SpongeBob SquarePants circle, but it's definitely better than what it was.
I also realized the protective mesh was a little messed up, but after a little bit of, it looked a lot better. So all that's left now is to install the new fan.
Where is the ground strap for this one? On the original one, this little ground strap connects directly to this negative terminal on the plug. And on this one, the replacement one I bought, same exact part number, doesn't have the ground strap. So I guess not all of these had what probably is a redundant ground, just to be sure that it gets the ground. And it's more than likely okay to not run it, but I could just swap the blades, right? Well, actually, hold on, let's test this.
I reattached the negative terminal of the battery because I removed it for welding, and then I grounded out the switch wire.
Alright, well that clearly works, so I guess I don't need to have that redundant ground strap on there, so cool.
After securing it in place, I brought it back over to the bike and reinstalled everything. I was about to install the new temperature switch that just arrived, but I realized, how exactly is the radiator grounded if it's rubber isolated? The answer? It's not. At least not without that redundant ground strap I forewent.
Yeah, that strap wasn't for the fan, it was for the radiator.
So, I pulled everything back off, uninstalled the fan, and swapped the good blade over to the original fan. And hopefully that should work fine. And with the fan plugged back in, everything checked out.
Oh yeah. Finally.
Now to install the new switch. Kawasaki sealed the original one with an O-ring, one that is very much now toast, but luckily one of the replacement O-rings I got for the carburetors seemed to be a match. The only thing more embarrassing than incorrectly crimping this bullet connector onto the wire is even attempting to do it in the first place, because I realized while editing this that all I had to do was unplug the wire here and plug in the switch. Oh well, it's not really a problem, it's just an extra wire.
I guess I could test if the fan works.
Oh right, and that can be done with the introduction of a little bit of heat.
Alright, well, let me just say that, holy crap, that fan bearing sounds absolutely terrible. I thought the right thing to do was to use the ground that is built into the wiring harness, but I'm thinking I might take everything back apart, put the replacement fan back on that actually sounded good, and just add my own little ground strap.
And that's exactly what I did. I ended up splicing together the ground wire from the DIY switch repair to the OEM radiator ground wire. I swapped the good fan blade back onto the good motor and reinstalled everything back here and back on the bike. I connected the other end of the ground wire to the upper radiator mount. The metal collar of the mount squeezes the terminal against the frame, so it should be a good connection. And it is. I reinstalled the temperature switch with a new O-ring, because I'm pretty sure I just burnt up the last one. But that's the cooling part of the cooling system completely wrapped up.
Nice.
It's time to take a look back at the thermostat. The broken parts and stuck bolts are still very broken and still very stuck. But that's okay because the $14 replacement arrived. And fortunately, it came already mostly disassembled. All I had to do was remove the adapter plate. I didn't capture the full process, but basically I torched the hell out of the aluminum casting to really loosen up the bolts, and I gave them hell with the impact driver. Now, the adapter plate for the cap got pretty toasty and hacked up in the process, so I'll be swapping that out with the original one. The new housing is in pretty decent shape, but it looks pretty bad. I mentioned in the last episode, working on the carburetors, that a great way to clean up parts like this is by vapor blasting, and that Taylor over at the Classic Octane YouTube channel has some really great videos on the process. Something that I completely forgot about until right now is that Taylor's workshop is only one wipe transition away. When I asked permission to use some clips for the last video, he asked me if I just wanted to come over and try out blasting myself, and I said okay. Like I already mentioned, he has a whole lot of videos that feature the whole process of vapor blasting, so I definitely recommend heading over to his channel to check that out and all of his projects. But the basic gist of the vapor blasting process is taking a good long look at the very nasty pieces, loading them into the booth, and just going to town on them.
It'll just take a couple seconds to start coming out.
It's definitely slow going, but it really couldn't be easier. But that's pretty much it. Really, the only bad thing is,
It's pretty much impossible to see anything.
Yeah.
after a water bath and a blowout with compressed air off camera, the parts look like this. Getting these to look like essentially brand new parts is all thanks to Taylor. So thank you, Taylor. Again, I'll have his channel linked in the description below.
These parts turned out just absolutely incredible. Compared to the older ones, the ones that the bike originally came with, it's just night and day. Seriously, they look so great in comparison. I'm actually pretty glad that I broke the original ones because I wouldn't have ended up with these otherwise. But alright, enough blabbing, let's go put these on the bike.
Well, hold on, you gotta put it back together first. With brand new hardware and O-rings, of course. The cleaned up thermostat was dropped in place, the new O-ring added, then the parts were secured together. The only seal I didn't replace is the radiator cap, and that kinda worried me at first. If it being old wasn't bad enough, there's also the fact that the plastic mating surface it seals against is a tad bit splotchy due to welding right next to it. I pulled out the Mighty Vac, which you might remember from my brother's twin turbo. Wait, I still haven't released the videos in that series yet. I gotta stop doing this. But it wasn't wanting to hold any vacuum. And then I remembered that this thing is a piece of crap, because even with the end completely capped off, it still wasn't holding any vacuum. But it did pass the tongue pressure test though.
Seems fine, so.
And we'll find out soon enough. The cap adapter plate was screwed in place with brand new bolts, after adding in the new O-ring of course. And lastly, the bleed nipple and the temperature sensor were installed. And that is the thermostat housing wrapped up. Now to throw it back on the bike, plumb it all up, secure it in place, and plug in the sensor. Before I get ahead of myself and add coolant and start the bike, there's one last part of the cooling system that needs to be addressed, and that is the overflow tank, or lack thereof. The radiator cap has a pressure relief valve built into it, so when the coolant heats up and pressurizes, some coolant is ejected out of the system so it doesn't overpressurize. When the engine's off and things cool back down, the pressure decreases in the system, creating a vacuum and sucks the ejected coolant back in. If there's no tank to store the coolant, it would just suck air into the system, and that's a no-no.
Now the coolant tank is specific to this bike, and the only replacements I could find are on eBay from Germany, where the price is $50 minimum plus shipping, and with that whatever wait times there are for things coming from overseas. So it does not make sense financially or temporally to go with that route. So instead, I got some paper and tape.
This paper tube is roughly the size of an inexpensive generic overflow tank that's available from Amazon. I wanted to make sure I could actually find a spot for it before I make the purchase though. I threw the front fairing back on just to make sure there'd be plenty of clearance to have the tank where I want it. And I think I want it right here. A couple days later, this shiny thing arrived at my door. And the plan is to attach it to the subframe bolts right here. And to do that, I'm pretty sure we're gonna have to get a little bit funky.
Oh my goodness.
I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Life moves pretty. It's no Nick Blackhurst creation, but hey, I've only just started to dip my toes into the world of bracket fabrication, so I'm still proud of it. If you're wondering why I bothered to use the supplied brackets, it's to tuck the tank inward as far as possible, decreasing the stick out by the length of the radius. But even with that, there still might be some clearance issues with the side body panels.
Now it's possible that you're wondering, Ronnie, with this coolant overflow tank sticking out like a sore thumb, how in the world are you going to fit the body panels back on the bike? Well, I'm not. I said in the description as well as in the pinned comment on part 1 that this is not going to be a full restoration, but I'm just going to give it enough love to get it back on the road safely and reliably. I've learned with the Fiero that driving it now is just as much fun as driving it when I first got it going, way before I restored the entire thing. I mean, I wouldn't go back and change anything. I love everything I did to the car. But going forward, I don't think I want to do that with every single project that I start. If I can enjoy this thing, just getting it going safely and reliably, then I think that's all I want to do to it. But if those reasons aren't cutting it for you, there's also the fact that I have a finite amount of time left in this barn, and I have other projects that I want to work on too, so full restoration is not possible even if I did want to.
Well, it's possible, but that means I couldn't do other stuff. And I want to do other stuff. Other stuff like adding coolant. And this stuff is silicate free, which is apparently what motorcycles like. I didn't even realize that until someone mentioned it in a comment, which is after I used this stuff. Guess I got lucky. To mitigate air in the system, I popped the plug from the water pump, added coolant until it started pouring out just a little bit, plugged it back up, and continued filling it up.
Is that leaking from there, or is that just... No, that's absolutely leaking from that hose.
If you already left a comment on this video pointing out the pitting on the housing and how it might be an issue for sealing, go ahead and award yourself 10 points. But also take away 10 points because you're the kind of person that leaves feedback on videos before you finish watching them. But the solution to fix this? JB Weld. It really is the answer to everything. After slathering it on both the inlet and the outlet and letting it cure overnight, I got to work sanding it smooth. Getting rid of cavities has never been easier. But just to be doubly sure there's not going to be any leaks, I went ahead and bought a brand new length of hose and brand new hose clamps. In addition to the new clamps being cleaner than the rusty factory ones, they're also wider, so theoretically they should provide a more evenly distributed clamping force, making a better seal. And it looks like they have. I'm seeing no leaks whatsoever.
Nope.
Okay, battery's charged, let's try again. I let it run for a good long while, and the temperature gauge is reading about halfway, so the fan should be kicking on any minute. Hey, there it is. Very cool. Pun fully intended. After a while, the fan shut off automatically, and the coolant overflow tank is working exactly as it should. So yeah, I guess that wraps up this cooling system adventure. I can finally run the bike for an extended period of time without risk of doing any damage. And that means I can finally vacuum balance these carbs and really dial them in. By this point, you probably realized I'm not going to be running the factory airbox. If one came with the bike, I absolutely would, but because one didn't, I'm not. And because used ones are pretty pricey, not to mention I still have to buy a brand new filter for it, it just made way more sense to go with pod filters. The carbs are already jetted for pod filters, and I nixed the cleaning system that ties into the factory airbox, so that's all good to go. But there is one more teeny tiny thing down below that I gotta take care of. The crankcase breather hose. It was supposed to plumb up into the airbox, that way any oil vapors leaving would just be sucked into the engine and burnt off, instead of just venting to atmosphere. So I gotta do something about this hose going nowhere. The plan is to keep the little hose, use one of these, and connect the two with this. This is a crankcase breather filter, a filter specifically for what I'm doing right now. It'll allow any air to escape the engine if need be, but it'll capture and retain any oil vapors in the process. Originally, I wanted to just stick it right on the nipple of the casting, but the room I had available didn't really agree with that plan. After cutting the tube down, cleaning up the edges, and securing these down with definitely the correct clamps on both sides, I popped it on the bike and clamped it in place. Not too shabby. And you can also see I finished this area up by pulling the decrepit battery tender off the bike.
It is toasty.
But now we can take care of the pod filters, which couldn't be easier to install. For the anal retentive among you, I'm sorry about that one filter having the sticker on the opposite side of the logo. But okay, time to balance the carbs. And syncing these up is the exact same process as it was in the last episode by adjusting these 3 screws on the butterfly valves. The outer screws adjust the ratio between the outer pairs, and the middle screw adjusts the ratio between the pair of pairs. But instead of eyeballing how open the butterfly valves are, we're going to measure the airflow with this kit right here. Now, out of the box, the dials aren't perfectly even with each other. They all measure the exact same, but their baselines have to be adjusted by turning these little screws. With that done, the vacuum caps can be popped off the carbs, and the hoses can be slid on. Now the idle should be higher than normal when doing this, so I brought it up to around 2000 RPM. And then, all of the valves are opened up enough to where it's reading accurately, but not too open to where the needle is bouncing around all crazily. The name of the game here is just to match the needles up, and right off the bat, they're not too far off of what they should be. Carbs 1 and 2 already look perfectly in sync, but carbs 3 and 4 are a little bit off, so I adjusted the screw until everything looked good. And of course, doing that is absolutely going to affect the idle speed since you're changing how open the butterfly valves are, so I brought the idle back down to 2000. And honestly, these are all right on the money. We're good to go. I brought the idle back down, pulled the gauges off, and capped the nipples. But to actually feel like I just got a motorcycle properly running and not just some machine on a bench, I threw on the gas tank and hopped up on there.
Alright.
This is absolutely fantastic. The only thing that would make this better, if I could actually ride it. But with there still being 19-year-old tires that can't hold air, 0 functioning brakes, a chain that's rusty as hell, and front forks that are clapped out, I wouldn't trust this thing going down my driveway and back. And even if I did, the bike is still tethered by the IV drip, meaning it's going nowhere. There is still a lot to do before this bike is ready to hit the streets. I guess time for me to get back to work. So, until next time, I'll see you guys later.